Robert Spencer from AECOM. I'm the leader for sustainable development across our buildings and places and environment and ground engineering teams in the EMEA region. And I've been working at AECOM for about 20 odd years and are working across a range of projects in that time. So built up a reasonably good background in how to deliver sustainable development projects and how to ensure that the operations in-house are as sustainable as they can be. We're focusing on sustainability and the circular economy. I think that they are two of the fundamental areas that we look at when we're thinking about how a project can get off the ground. And I suppose what I'd say is that when you're thinking about a project and how to incorporate sustainable development thinking and circular economy thinking and a lot of the other pressures that are facing us these days around the climate emergency and biodiversity loss, the earlier we can think about that in the process of our project, the better. Because if we can get sustainable development thinking, start thinking about the footprint of the project or the way in which it will impact society and the environment very early on, when we're actually still deciding whether we need that project or what particular form that project needs to take. So the optioneering and the pre-feasibility stage, I would say that's the right time to be thinking about these questions. And then I think my answer is changing to this as we live through these very interesting times, because if you'd asked me a year ago what would the first sustainable development thing I would think of if I was going to be starting a project, I'll probably come up with a different answer to what I am going to now, which is actually thinking about the climate emergency. Because, we've got the UN conference coming up in New York, which we know Greta Thunberg is sailing to as we speak in September. That conference has been brought about because we've had the IPCC report saying we've got 12 years to respond to climate change. Actually, we kind of got 12 months because we've got to peak our global emissions in 2020. So major projects in the UK are going to have their contribution to this. If you're looking at the infrastructure sector, 50% of the UK emissions over the next few years probably will come from big infrastructure projects, both in terms of their construction and their operation. So how do we get those carbon emissions down? How do we bend that curve on projects that are already in the pipeline, already being thought about right now? So, and thinking about the second question, the first thing an organization could look at, well, I think the first thing is, does this fit with our 2050 net zero emissions scenario? If we're starting something now, how long is that project going to go for? What's the lifetime of that project? Will it still be around in 20, 30 years? Or is it something that, it'll actually be done and dusted and we'll need to be dismantling it and rethinking the next project in 10 years? When we think about that, we need to think about what happens at the next life. What happens when that project has come to its working life and what happens in its next life? The materials we use, the components, the assets that we're creating, how are we drawing down on nature to create those, and what happens to them in their next life? And I think that's something we can keep at the top of our mind as we go into these discussions.